Hello, everyone. We are super excited to have you here for episode 33 of Coast to Coast Lifestyles. And I'm Cassie Webb on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and Heather over in the East Seattle, Washington area. We have very different markets, so we have a lot of fun because when you do this all day, every day, and I've been doing this for many years, so you can kind of start taking things for granted. So it's kind of cool to get a perspective from somewhere else where you kind of get to see things with fresh eyes. And so last week, our original intention was really kind of do more like a typical houses in our area. But in researching for that, I had kind of seen kind of brought to light, I guess, some of how the typical types of homes, specifically architecture that we see, kind of plays into the history of our area. And so since then, Heather did a deep dive into kind of how the architecture and history are intertwined in her area. So I'm super excited to learn more. So Heather, tell us what you got.
Sure. Yeah. As Cassie said, her video last week, for those that don't know, is I had strep throat last week, so I couldn't really do much. Feeling much better this week, thankfully. And her video or her thing really sparked my interest in actually learning more about Seattle history, because I realized I didn't know a lot about it prior to tech moving to the area. And I learned just how much influence Seattle had on really the entire world, which is really, really cool. I'm only going to share snippets here and there as it pertains to architecture, but there's also a lot of really cool homes that I'm very excited to show. Also, I do want to make a quick note, because I told other people that I would. So this is a pre-recorded video. We recorded it by the time it airs yesterday. It was recorded yesterday, basically. I only mentioned that because there are some homes that might be getting offers and stuff like that. So I told them that I would mention it's pre-recorded in case any information changes for the listings that I'm going to show. So to get started, so I took some screenshots of basically these are active homes in the Seattle region. So I live over in this little area in Ames Lake, and my main world is basically all of this area over here. But of course, most people know Seattle, which is about 25 minutes from Bellevue, which is kind of the core of my area. And so as you can see, this is everything that was built prior to 1915. There's a lot in Seattle, not a lot on the east side at all. And the biggest reason for that is because immigrants and people originally started coming to the Pacific Northwest during the Klondike Gold Rush in the early 1900s. And there was a massive immigration of Europeans, Japanese, Filipinos, and other cultures. And it led to that massive influx of people really led to a lot of infrastructure projects, including the Lake Washington Ship Canal, which for anybody who is from the area is basically this area. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's this area right here. So we got the Ballard Locks here, we got the Fremont Cut, and then the Montlake Cut right here. So it's basically what feeds the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, into Lake Washington. And so there were just a ton of infrastructure projects going on with everybody that was coming in. And oh, by the way, anybody who knows the Pacific Northwest knows that we're trees all day. We have tons and tons and tons of greenery around here. And one of the things I love about it is that's not really going to change. And so with that, one of the, actually literally the main export from Washington during the 1900s was lumber. And with that, there was also ships and stuff like that that we created and we sent off. So a lot of these homes were for people in those industries. They were in the lumber industries, they were in the shipbuilding industry, and that really was just all Seattle. If you had anything out here, then it was usually either vacation land, because way back when it would take probably hours and hours or even days to get over here. While now with our current infrastructure, it takes an hour, maybe. So when you came to out here, you mostly saw vacation homes and you saw farmland. You didn't really see anything else. So I'll show you a couple of different homes. So one of the homes I'm going to show you is actually a farmhouse up in this area. And then the rest of them are different kinds of architecture in Seattle and why they, basically why it turned out the way that it did, or architecture is the way that it is. So let me switch over here. So this home was on that east side that I mentioned. This home was built in 1902, and it is listed by Riley Fox, I believe, with Compass Real Estate. And she was super awesome when I was talking to her about showcasing this listing. She gave me a little bit of history, which was really fun. So she's actually the one that told me that a lot of this particular area was vacation homes once upon a time. Like now we drive hours to get to vacation homes, but this was the vacation home at the time, where people currently actually just commute on a daily basis from this area to Seattle. But yeah, this home was built in 1902. And honestly, I really thought this home was really cool to showcase because it did have a lot of the air of that original 1900s in the area. There is a lot of hardwood used because, again, we had massive lumber in this area. And so you see a lot of wood and a lot of brick that is kind of reflected in a lot of these older homes. Obviously, this one's been significantly renovated over the years. But one of the main things I wanted to showcase that is very typical of 1900s homes in our areas, I don't remember if it's the same way on the East Coast, but the top floors tend to see a lot of these slanted ceilings, which is particularly interesting these days because for people who don't know, to constitute legal usable square footage, you need to have at least 7 feet in every direction, and that includes vertical. And in a lot of these 100-plus-year-old homes, the height of the top of the ceiling was usually about 7 feet. And when you have these slopes on either side, you start getting into less than 50% of the space is technically usable space. So the greater Seattle area is kind of like unofficially grandfathered into that old rule of we can still count this as legal square footage. Just because a lot of people over the years have already converted it to bedrooms. They've already converted it to usable space. So being able to take that away would really screw with Washington or Seattle real estate for all of the early 1900s homes. So anyways, that's a quick little look at that one. It's a really, really cool piece of property. And then the next one is actually from Seattle, inside of Seattle, and it is listed by Spafford Robbins with Compass. And it is 1905, and it's about the same square footage. A lot of the homes in the early 1900s were between like 2,500 and 3,000 square feet. Or at least these days there are that might include extensions and stuff like that. But the average I saw was about that square footage. So they're really decent sized homes. A lot of them also had very sectioned off rooms. Like it had a very separate and private dining room. It would have in this case, like a separate sitting room or like a walk-in area. Yeah, a lot of the rooms tended to be oddly angled. Like it's just very typical of, again, homes in early 1900s for our area. Do you have a lot of homes? I don't remember. You don't have a hell of a lot of homes from that time frame, right? Because you guys have had the hurricanes and stuff like that.
Right. And I think one thing that's funny when we're talking about this is kind of looking at how national history plays into even our very different markets in very different areas. Because I thought it was funny when you're talking about the square footage, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty consistent. But for older homes, like I'm curious why that is. But if you think about, times where, remember the Roaring 20s, right? Before the Great Depression, people, I wasn't there, but seems we're doing very well. Spacious homes, at least the ones that have stood the test of time. I'm sure people were building shacks that just got taken down since then. But the people who have built these homes that have stood the test of time. I remember last week I was talking about the woodwork, the woodwork architecture and those beautiful claw tubs like you're showing right now. And it's like that. And then you see in our area, which I would be interested to see in yours, but in our area, then you have the Great Depression happen across the nation. And now we go to super modest homes. When they even started building homes at all, again, there was a dip, in the amount of construction. And even today, I was having a conversation about, we have custom home builders here right now building, starter homes, affordable homes. Because right now with the economy, it's very funny how architecture, even our economy, plays into architecture when you're looking at the history in correlation with the home. So this is super interesting. But yes, so very cool, very spacious, great woodwork, lots of really cool features on these older homes. We don't have a ton. Probably a lot have been taken out by hurricanes through the years. We don't have a ton. But the ones that we do have, there's definitely some similarities.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and it's super interesting. And also, the reason I stopped on these photos is to give you an idea. I'm about 5'10". And in some of these homes, I literally cannot walk into the room. I need to slouch. And I have a great photo. I wish I pulled it up for this, where it was probably about a 90-year-old home. And I literally, the shower entry to the shower was about here on me. So it gives you an idea of just how small some of these upstairs rooms can be. But yeah, and then this next one I am very excited about for multiple reasons. So first off, this home that I'm about to showcase is co-listed by Ted Bash and Deidre Doyle. And they're both with Windermere Real Estate, different offices. But like I mentioned earlier, there was a massive influx of Europeans coming to the area and wanting to take part in the lumber and ship industries. And with that came some really famous European architects. And for anybody who's an architect nerd, especially in the Pacific Northwest, you might have heard of Carl Gould. I don't know how to pronounce it, Gould, but Carl Gould and Charles Bebb. And they are incredibly famous in our local area for a very specific thing, but I'll get to that in a second. But this house is one of the things that they designed. And if you are at all familiar with European architecture, or like if you know the really, really old homes on the East Coast where the same thing, there's a lot of European influence. There's a lot of dark wood, a lot of it. And most of the house is made up of dark wood. And this particular one was very obvious, at least to me, likely built by people of wealth and influence at the time, because it is a much larger home than the average home from this area. This one is 9,300 square feet. But it is just an absolute gorgeous home. And just a lot of it has really stuck true to the original 1900s feel to it. And I was so excited to talk to Deidre and get permission to showcase this home, because it is just so, it's like a time capsule when you walk into it, with little, obviously, updates here and there to keep it livable, but it's just really fun. But one of my favorite things about this home is that, like I said, it was built by Carl Gould and Charles Bebb, which are also known for being the builders of Suzzallo Library at University of Washington's campus. And this library is literally world renowned. Like, I've seen it in history books and seen it in stories from around the world. I went to University of Washington for college, and these photos really don't do it justice, just how grand and cool and unique it is. Everybody calls it the Harry Potter room because this literally looks like you walked into Harry Potter, the Suzzallo reading room. But it just has a lot of beautiful stone. It has a lot of beautiful wood. And it's to see a house that was literally the same architects as the one who built a world famous library is really, really cool to me. And I geeked out hardcore about it. I talked to the listing agent for like half an hour this morning just about how cool the property was. So thank you to Deidre and to Ted for allowing me to show this home because it made me very excited. But yeah, so that is pretty much the epitome of the European influence on early 1900s architecture. Now, to kind of go back to what you were talking about at one point, Cassie, is the Great Depression. So Seattle was a booming economy in the early 1900s. And then when the Great Depression hit, it hit Seattle harder than it hit most parts of the country. And to kind of give you an idea is when you look at like 1930, right? Like right as before the Great Depression truly hit, there were about 2,500 building permits that were issued for residential homes during that time. And then in 1932, there was only 300. Like wow. There was just no money to go around. Nobody had any, and there were no resources. And then we were also hit really hard by the labor strikes that were going on. So there's just really not a heck, like there is some homes between that, but not a heck of a lot. In fact, I want to pull up my other screenshot again of the homes that are available. So again, this is 1915 prior. And then once you get into 1919, 1940, a lot of these homes are actually more from the 40s than they are from the 30s because of how hard we were hit. But you also see that there starts to be a little bit more expansion over onto the east side. And there's not really a heck of a lot, honestly, to show with these homes because a lot of these homes are having a bug in my face that's flying around. So I'm just swatting at nothing. So I don't have a heck of a lot to show with in terms of the homes between, you know, early 1900s to 1940s or 50s. But just kind of gives you an idea of how things started to spread. And then when we go to 1945 to the 1970s, a lot of these homes ended up expanding because Boeing started becoming really famous. And I did not know this until my research, but Boeing apparently used to be into shipbuilding. And then during the Great Recession, they decided to get into pretty much anything that they can do. They did cabinetry, they did just random things. And they literally had at one point about 28 employees because of all this. And then World War II hit. And in World War II, their aircraft started coming out. And then after World War II, they're known for their aircraft. They're focusing more on their commercial side. And so that, what did I say, 32 employees or whatever it was, 82 employees, ended up growing to thousands and then very quickly to tens of thousands. And so Boeing is right in this area right here. So we're in this area. And so all of a sudden, all the homes that were being built went from here to all of this area too. And so all the Boeing employees had places to go. And at one point, 1 in every 2 manufacturing people were Boeing employees. Wow. So it just shows you just how much influence they had on this area. And so that largely created the next economic boom that the greater Seattle area ended up having because of their part in World War II and then because of their part with commercial aircraft. And obviously we all know who they are today and what they do. Also to give you an idea, the area's population grew from over 66% between 1940 and 1960. Again, because of the Boeing influence. And then with that, we saw a massive housing boom in the 50s because they're obviously needing to create housing for all these employees that are coming in. And so during that time, this freeway I-90 and this freeway I-520 were created to help give people more access to getting to either side of Lake Washington. So that is another reason why we saw much more housing coming into this area. And then let me show you kind of what that architecture ended up looking like. All right. So this home is courtesy of Being You with Kelly Wright, Real Estate of Seattle. And this home is really like the epitome of 1950s architecture. We saw a lot of use of stone during that time. And most homes are ramblers. We did occasionally see split levels, but those didn't truly come in until about 1970s for us. But in the 1950s, we saw mostly ramblers, so single story. We saw a lot of stonework, a lot modest houses. Like these homes were only about 1,200 square feet, give or take. Like they're much more modest than the early 1900s. The kitchens were usually blocked off from everything else. Sometimes you had a little bit of dining space. Most of them had wood fireplaces. And these days, most of them are still wood fireplaces. I don't think I've walked into many or seen many that have transitioned into gas fireplaces for those areas. But yeah, just much more modest, a lot smaller, but it fit what they needed at the time, right? They just needed to house tons and tons and tons of new people that suddenly came into the area. Mm-hmm. So that's really the epitome of what that looked like. And then really there wasn't anything of note between the 70s and 80s as far as just history goes. Like we had some events, like the World Fair was in Seattle at one point, which is what led to the Space Needle. Oh my God, I blinked for a second. Which was what led to the Space Needle, which is very iconic for Seattle. But really, aside from the big events in the area, there wasn't like any industrial or economic things that really stood out in the area. But they still had a lot of ebbs and flows in the economy. And with that came, of course, ebbs and flows of new homes on the market. And this one is by Clinton Fink with Windermere Real Estate, who's actually in my office. And this home is very much just the 70s through and through. There's large bay windows. And in this area in particular, it's upset on top of a hill. And I believe this is downtown Bellevue. And it just, again, big windows, bay windows. A lot of them had views. This is some of the money that started moving up into the hills. And again, a lot of stonework. I don't think I've yet to walk into a 70s house in our area that doesn't have a load of stonework. But just beautiful homes. There's usually a lot of level changes in these homes to kind of more visually and physically separate the spaces. Kitchens were still very blocky, a lot of wood still, a lot of lumber, but they're just really cute and very cool homes. A lot of these also still tended to be in the roughly, I want to say this one's, 2,600 square feet. So roughly the 2,500 square foot range. So a little bit bigger than we were seeing in the 50s, but nowhere near what we were seeing in the in the early 1900s. And then this is where we get into where I did actually have some knowledge of, is in the mid 1980s. Microsoft was actually originally founded, I want to say it was Arizona, but in the mid 80s, they actually moved to Seattle's east side, which is primarily Redmond, which they still reside in today as their headquarters. And all of a sudden, we started seeing an influx of how that technology, as technology was rising, we saw a massive influx in homes on the east side. So to go back one more time, maybe not one more time, but to go back to the other one again. So this was the 1970s to the 1990 or to 1990. So we're seeing that growth over into the east side quite significantly. And then do I want the next one? Yeah. So you just start seeing the growth into the east side, and you can still see it here as well between 1990 and 2010. And so a lot of these homes that were in this area, in the Sammamish area, and in the Redmond, Kirkland area, a lot of those ended up being the tech money that was coming in. It was the Microsofts. Amazon was discovered here in Bellevue. I got to walk through the home actually that Bezos started Amazon out of in Bellevue. But 1995, I believe it was Amazon came about. Again, Microsoft was always growing and growing incredibly rapidly. And so when you're really looking at homes in probably this area, like the Sammamish, Redmond, even up in the hills of this part of Redmond, it's really interesting. I don't know how to describe how it is so obvious what was early tech money and what was just, other things, because they all had the exact same feel to them, the exact same design style and architecture. So this is a listing by another wonderful agent in my office, Nicole Barkley with Windermere. And this home is really just the epitome of 90s architecture in our area, especially with the growth of tech and the boom of tech. So some homes saw vaulted ceilings, and then there were always these closed off kind of staircase designs with a lot of them. Over the years, a lot of homes have kind of opened these up and made them feel more open concept, knocked out walls, stuff like that. But I really wanted to showcase this home because it still had that 90s feel, just kind of brought into the, 21st century. But this is very common to have the dining room. You have the kitchen, and then you have the dining room on one side and the living room on the other side. And then the main sitting room at the very front. And this is just a very typical home for the 90s. You walk into any home from the 90s in our area, and most of them are going to more or less have this similar layout, similar feel to it. Very blocky. There's a lot of interesting angles, as you see up here, like random ledges and angles. I'm not entirely sure what influenced that, but with that boom of housing because of tech, this is just kind of what we saw. And then jumping into, I'm trying to rush it because I know we're already at almost half an hour, so I'm trying to get through the rest. But as most people remember, in 2008, we started seeing another recession. And with that, we saw a massive halt in houses. In fact, I did a search for homes that were available that were built between 2008 and 2012. So basically just the core part of the recession. And all I could find were custom homes. Literally, it's the only thing I could find. I could not find mass build projects. I couldn't find basic cookie cutter. I only saw custom homes. And most of them looked like they were made by people that were really rolling in the money because they just had so many unique aspects to them. And this particular home, I was also really excited for. It's by Stephanie Stetler with Realogics Sotheby's. And the reason I want to showcase this home is because it had a little bit of everything that I was seeing through all the different listings, not that there were a lot, but all the different listings I saw that were built in that time period. So you started seeing a lot more outdoor spaces. You started seeing a lot more covered areas. Again, we still had a lot of wood and stone kind of architecture coming through. There's basement theater in this one, and gym. But a lot of them just kind of had this almost cabin-y feel to it, just like this one does. So there's a lot of wood accents to it. Yeah, it's just beautiful, beautiful woodwork. A lot of them ended up having spiraling staircases. A lot of them had really, really dark stone as the flooring. And this was really just any home that was built during this time had the wood, it had the dark stone, and it was very highly customized, which I thought was particularly interesting because that shows you that the people who really made it through the recession relatively unscathed were the ones who actually had a little bit of money in the bank already. So
Yeah. They had gotten to the point that the day-to-day issues with the recession, they were shielded from to some degree. And I would bet the other thing is I'm sure construction costs were, relatively speaking, very low. It was probably the perfect time to build a custom home because there wasn't a huge supply. We saw that when I did last week here on the coast, very few new houses being built. And so it's like, that's the time your material costs are going to be lower, supply and demand, your contractors are probably looking for work. Yep. Super cool. That was just a fantastic time for a lot of people to take advantage of the benefits to the downturn of the market for those who were financially prepared.
Yep, definitely. Right. Yeah. And then there's one funny thing I want to show before I get to the last house. And that is, as you guys have been seeing with this thing, so we start, prior to 1915, it's all in this area. And then it's just slowly but surely expands north and south. It slowly but surely expands east. But through this particular view on our MLS, I could always see the individual homes. And then I got to things that were literally just 2020 to present, literally just the last 4 years. And there are so many homes that it did not let me look at the individuals. It was just like, pick an area. There's so much new construction, pick an area. And that is due to several different factors. So for one, I am willing to bet you most of these homes are between 2023 and on, with a few being 2020, 2021, because as we all remember, we had a worldwide pandemic. And so it was suddenly a lot harder to build a home. There were a lot more labor shortages. There were a lot more material shortages. And then in 2022, I want to say it was, a study came out saying that Washington we're literally last place in the available housing to resident ratio. We are literally last place in the entire country in the state of Washington. And so there was suddenly a very big push by the state to create new construction homes and to build on whatever they could. And so a lot of these homes, basically, once the labor started getting under control again, once the materials started getting under control again, there's just been a lot of construction. And there has been, like every era, a typical design language that you start seeing. And so for us, that ends up looking like this guy right here. So this home is a listing courtesy of Scott Estes with John L. Scott. And this is pretty much the epitome of what 2020's architecture looks like. You have a lot more blocky designs. So even our house that we just built has a very blocky design. It's kind of similar to this one, where the front on the left and the front on the right are both standing out from the entryway, which is actually just more recessed into the home. You start seeing a lot more windows. You're starting to see a lot smaller properties because we're trying to fit more homes in a smaller amount of area to increase our available homes. But a lot of them have just these beautiful grand entryways. They're very wide hallways. I would say probably 90+% of these new construction homes I walk into have either a office directly inside the entryway and or a guest suite that is on the main floor. And for a lot of people as well, that's because with a lot of the immigrants that are coming to our area, a lot of them tend to do multi-generational living. So they always need to have guest suites on the main floor. Our kitchens are usually a lot bigger as well. I would say most islands are between probably give or take about 8 to 10 feet long and like 4 to 5 feet wide. Like they're massive islands, and floor to ceiling cabinets. Like they're just very grandiose. There's tends to be a lot more hardwood, engineered hardwood for the flooring, and a lot more bright colors as well. So, but the one thing I've realized as I've kind of gone through the ages around us is that every generation brings the outside inside. Every single generation has a lot of wood. Every single generation has a lot of stone. And it's kind of cool to watch that design language kind of continue to be reflected over the 120 years that basically I showcased today. So it's just the bedrooms are typically a lot bigger as well, but and bathrooms are a lot bigger. So this just kind of gives you an idea of very modern, literally less than 5 years old. This one was built literally this year. So it just kind of gives you an idea of really what current day architecture is for our area. And Sammamish, fun fact, is I believe the fastest or one of the fastest growing financial incomes in the entire country. So again, there's a lot of the tech people that live over here. And so with that comes a lot of the tech money, which is a lot. I think our median income is like $150,000 a year or something like that in a lot of the greater Seattle area. So that kind of gives you an idea of where all that money is going. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's pretty much my thing through the history. I didn't end up looking at I didn't end up getting permission more so for the most affordable versus the least affordable homes in our area like you did. And plus I know we're over time, so I'm not going to worry about that too much, but to give you an idea, the cheapest home that's available right now in Seattle's east side is $580,000-ish, built in the 1920s. And it is about half an hour away from Seattle. And then the most expensive one is actually, how about you guess? How much do you think the most expensive house in our entire area costs?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. You're putting me on the spot.
I know. I'm sorry. I just thought it would be fun.
The most expensive, I feel like that would fluctuate a lot, but I'll just take a stab, like $15 million. 20.
Go way up. Our most expensive house in our area right now is $70 million. And that is a well-maintained, beautifully updated 1990s house. It's like 18,000 or something square feet. Like it's a gorgeous house. And then our median in my particular area, which again is Seattle's east side, is like just under 2 million. So that kind of gives you an idea of what affordability is like around here. You have everything from the big tech money CEOs that can spend the $70 million. And then you have pretty much 580 is the cheapest we have. And that's for a 1920s home that's gone through a very basic renovation. So, and then we have everything in between. So while I can't showcase those homes, that gives you kind of an idea of what our market looks like, and basically within about a half-hour drive in any direction of where I live.
Yeah.
So
we talked about this.
That's my long thing.
Yeah, this has me interested. We're gonna have to look and see if we have it or if we could put it in later this year. But it'd be very interesting to compare cost of living, even like what's a gallon of gas, what's a gallon of milk. What is your income? Because we've talked about median housing and we talked a little bit about income and kind of how those relate, but it would be very interesting to see like are we going to Burger King if y'all have Burger King and paying the same amount, or are we paying different amounts for the same thing? Because also I'm like, well, the people who work in more the entry level type career fields, like where are they living if your cheapest house is 500,000? So that would be super cool to kind of like dive into some of those kind of more economic topics to see, you know, hey, coast to coast lifestyles. So the lifestyles of, you know, how that looks in our cost of living versus wages. So that'd be super fun. So
yeah, that would be amazing. And I think it is on our list sometime. I just don't remember when.
Yeah, this was super fun, and I really enjoyed the history lesson as well. And I didn't think about that. And actually, as you were talking, I was like, I never actually really thought about where your part of the country lines up with Russia and Asia and some different. And I was like, geography is not my strong suit. But I was like, oh yeah, so that makes sense that, you know, there was a lot of that was such a major port. And so much, you know, industry there. So, because I'm with you, like in my mind, it's just the history picks right up with, you know, the 1980s and Microsoft and so on. So, well, we have had a lot of fun the last couple of weeks. If you didn't catch it, you guys can go catch and see the similarities and differences of Mississippi Gulf Coast on last week's episode. And we will see you guys again next week. Same time, same